Hello everybody and welcome to my guide for the Skaven Spells of Plague. Now this lore is very offensive, with pretty much all of the spells focused on taking out enemies or making your own units better at doing so. You also have a couple of summons, which make this a great lore when you are outnumbered and need to use clever rat deployment to your advantage. And finally, it's also very strong versus late game units, with a lot of spells focused on weakening them and punching through armor. And of course, the only faction that can use this lore is the Skaven. Our first spell is Plagrash, and it is of course the passive of the lore. It targets enemy units map-wide whenever a spell is cast, and imbues them with the Plagrash effect, which is minus 10% speed and minus 5% vigor for 10 seconds. Now of course, since this is a passive, it's a nice little bonus whenever you cast a spell, and sapping the enemy vigor constantly is always useful for tiring them out quicker over the course of the battle. The speed will also mean the enemy has a harder time avoiding any spells with a longer wind-up time. Our first castable spell is Blessed with Filth. This is an augment spell. It costs 4 winds of magic and has a 29-second cooldown. It can be targeted on the caster themselves, allied units, or directly on the ground, and it has a range of 200 meters. It imbues affected units with poison damage in a 40-meter area of effect for 22 seconds. Since you can hit an area of effect, this is a good one for using on the front lines when the enemy needs slowing down and softening up. Poison damage is one of the best effects in the game, as it makes enemy units worse and easier to take out. Put it on the front lines or back lines, just make sure you hit as many of your units as possible to ensure the highest possible output of poison. The Overcast, as with all Overcast, comes with a 50% chance of a miscast. It costs 7 winds of magic and doubles the duration to 44 seconds. Once you get later into the game, this one will become more useful, as enemies will be able to handle 22 seconds of poison damage, so doubling up will ensure they are weakened for a very long time. Aside from that, use it in the same scenarios as before, on clumps of your own units. Next up we have Pestilent Breath. This is of course a breath spell, costs 8 winds of magic and has a 32-second cooldown. It can all be cast on the ground and has a range of 100 meters. It causes moderate damage in an expanding tear-shaped attack. It can disrupt enemy units and is strong versus multiple units, but weak versus armor. As with all spells like this, it's really an early game spell, and once enemies start getting even a little bit of armor, they aren't going to feel this. Use it on clumps of early game units to ensure max damage, but remember that this damage can hit your own units as much as the enemy, so angle it right, hit most of them and least of you. The Overcast costs 11 winds of magic and now poisons any unit hit. To be honest, for an extra 3 winds of magic, I don't really see this as being worth it, when you could give your own units poison damage for 22 seconds for only 1 winds of magic more. The poison effect won't last very long, so I would say just don't use this Overcast at any time. Next up we have Vermintide. It's a summon spell, costs 7 winds of magic, has a 41-second cooldown, and can only be used 5 times. It must be cast on the ground, and has a range of 60 meters. It summons a unit of clan rats, which degrade over time. Now of course, clan rats are debatably the worst unit in the Skaven roster, so summoning them is hardly going to turn the tide of battle, but what they are good at is bogging down the enemy. If the enemy's running away or charging at your ranged units, pinning them down with these lads, then picking them apart while they struggle can seriously come in clutch. Of course, they will degrade, so it doesn't really matter if you friendly fire them. It truly is the Skaven way, and this spell has no Overcast. Next up we have Wither. This is a hex spell, costs 10 winds of magic, and has a 37-second cooldown. It can be targeted directly on enemies or on the ground, and has a 200-meter range. It causes all enemy units in a 40-meter area of effect to suffer minus 30 armor for 50 seconds. This of course comes in more use later into the game when the enemy starts to get more armor under their belts. Pretty simple to use. If the enemy has some armor you're struggling to get through, pop this on a group of them and you'll have an easier time. Of course, focus on the highest armor targets you can hit, since there's no point using it on low armor targets or something that you can't deal damage to while they're weakened. The Overcast costs 16 winds of magic and doubles the armor reduction to minus 60 armor. Very similar to the base spell, now with double armor reduction. Use it just the same, but reserve Overcasting for units with huge armor stats, as there is no point reducing a 50 armor target by 60, as you're wasting a lot of magic for how much gain, especially in the late game when you should have some armor piercing damage anyway. Next we have Plague, which is a vortex spell. It costs 11 winds of magic and has a 50-second cooldown. It can only be cast on the ground and has a 150-meter range. It causes major magical damage in a large expanding area of effect, and it is strongest versus multiple units and powerful versus armor. Unlike a lot of vortex spells, this one is very easy to hit. Once the enemy clump up, simply cast this in the middle of them and watch the fireworks. It deals devastating damage to all units caught in the area, including your own, so make sure you're at least half careful not to blast your own units to hell. Other than that, feel free to target any blob you see. The Overcast costs 16 winds of magic and has increased armor piercing damage. This one should be reserved for the most armored enemy units. If the base spell isn't punching through enough armor, then this is what you need. Use it the exact same, stick it in the biggest clump of the toughest enemies you can, and try not to hit too many of your own guys. And finally we come to Pestilent Birth, which is another summon spell. It costs 16 winds of magic, has a 48-second cooldown, and can only be used twice. It must be casted directly on the ground, and has a 60-meter range. It summons a unit of plague monks that degrade over time. Unlike clan rats, these lads actually do some damage. Now they aren't the most armoured in the world, but they deal a lot of damage, particularly to less armoured targets. They are great for casting onto the enemy back lines to either take out their ranged units, or charge the backs of the front lines to sandwich the enemy into a swift death. Of course, they still degrade, so whatever they do, make sure they deal a lot of damage before they go out, and don't have them simply chasing enemy units for the entire duration, as it really is a waste, and you may as well have clan rats doing that job for you. There we go, that concludes how to use every single spell in the Skaven Spells of Plague. If you enjoyed this video, then do be sure to leave it a like. If you've got any more questions about this lore, then absolutely leave a comment down below, and I'll be more than happy to help you out. And of course, subscribe if you want to see more content like this. Warhammer 3 content is coming extremely soon, so definitely subscribe if you want to see that. It's going to be crazy. If you'd like to support the channel, then do be sure to check out COLONELDAMNEDERS.store. We've got all sorts of cool merch designs, we've got hoodies, we've got mugs, we've got stickers, we've got everything you could possibly need. And if you'd like to check it out, there's a link in the description, or just heading over to COLONELDAMNEDERS.store. I'd also like to take this time to thank all supporters of the channel, like Dominic Shamas, and in particular Henry Tucker, for their support at Mountain Clean Ones tier. Really can't thank each and every supporter enough. One more time, thank you all so very much for watching, and for now, I've been COLONELDAMNEDERS, and I will see you next turn.